One of my companies, we had an engineering team of about 7 people, and a few of my team members went to a conference, and they were talking about all of these tools that we've been building, and the companies that we were talking to are like, so how big is your engineering team? Like 50 people? Nope. 7. That's how much an A-player team, A-plus player team, can outperform your average Joe. Building a resilient team in today's hybrid and often fully remote work environment is more important than ever. This podcast episode goes into the essential strategies and practices that leaders can employ to cultivate a team that can withstand challenges, adapt to change, and bounce back stronger from setbacks. We'll explore the key characteristics of resilient teams and share practical insights on fostering a supportive and growth-oriented culture within your organization. Welcome to the morebusiness.com podcast. My name is Raj Khera. I'm your host, Mr. More Business, and I'm joined today by Dr. Jeff Kaplan. He's an executive coach, CEO Coach of the Year for 2022 from CEO Today magazine. Jeff, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Raj. Great to be here.
Today, we will be talking about building a resilient team. It's something that people really consider because your team is everything. Every time you want to build an organization, you've got to rely on the team members. They've got to rely on each other. And in one of our recent podcasts, we talk about the difference between groups and teams. But today, we're going to take it one step further, and that's how you build a resilient team. Jeff, what does it mean to have a high-performing or resilient team?
Well, let me first start by saying there are some amazing models of high-performing teams out there. There's some great articles, books, authors, speakers. To that point, if anybody is more interested beyond this, gets in touch with you, I'd be happy to send some references. But one way that I look at high-performing teams is culture and productivity. Right. So I like to say like a team that is in flow, right? The work gets done, job satisfaction's high, communication and collaboration are up. Decision making there's a system for decision making. They have a set of agreements around how they're going to operate together, right? And so they're knocking it out of the park, and they're happy, including having things like healthy conflict.
So that's high performing. Is that the same thing as a resilient team? Resiliency almost to me seems like they can weather storms.
Yeah. So it's a great distinction, right? So when you think of resilient, what comes to my mind is that high performing is like a snapshot. Like, oh, they're awesome. And then I come back 2 months later and like, oh my God, like what the heck happened? Oh, well, we had to do major layoffs and the market changed and this and this. So resiliency to me is having a set of structures and principles and tools, quite frankly, that helps you adjust. And I'll just say this, it starts with you, like being resilient as a person, right? Taking care of yourself, which unfortunately a lot of people are not doing these days.
You know, I hear a lot of CEOs talk about how their teams are high performing, that they're firing on all cylinders. And I think a lot of times they just get burned out because they're firing on all cylinders all the time. And sometimes it's almost a facade that they got to put on, like they're really doing all this extra stuff. And boy, in the background, fires are burning, things are happening, the family may be falling apart, but they really need to take care of themselves. Includes health, includes mental health, physical health, all of that. And I think that's a really important point. As you discussed what a high-performing team was, it sounds like the process actually is really what's driving it. It's not just, hey, we've got this team and they're all great people. What you described was actual processes that are in place, put in by the leadership, by the executives. So could you talk to that for a moment?
Yeah, it's got to be very intentional. It doesn't just happen. So one way that I could talk about this is if I were to come in, right, so let's say you got new team, and it may take, by the way, easily a year to really be in that flow space. But it sort of starts with some, like maybe even using like a DISC or a Hogan or like some sort of personality assessment. A lot of people use Myers-Briggs. I think it's overused, but still used, it's fine. But to create a common language and a common experience to understand how we best communicate, right? And then also do a little bit of personal sharing, right? You know, so just again, start to create that safe space. But then from there, you start developing a set of agreements about how to communicate and collaborate, right? How are we going to make this? Right? What happens when that decision-making process fails? So now you've got a process for decision-making, right? And then there's communication, collaboration. Like, what are we going to do to kind of check and make sure that we are doing okay, right? Like when are we going to stop and say, hey, what's working and what's not working with regard to our team? So doing retreats, things like that. So
There's more with the hybrid environment that we're all in, and especially like I'm in software, and I've had teams where I'm here in the Washington D.C. area, and then I've got team members throughout Europe. I've got them on the west coast of the U.S. I've got them in India. I've got them in possibly Argentina or somewhere. And so you really need to have structures and processes in place. A lot of times people will put up like there's a software tool called Jira, which is a great project management tool for software development. And you can have people enter information and you take a look at it and you go back and forth. A lot of times today people use tools like Asana, Monday, those kind of things to keep projects in gear while they have these distributed and remote teams. But you're talking about something that's even beyond that, because just having access to a project management tool isn't indicative of a high-performing team. It just means that you're paying a subscription fee for this project management tool.
Well,
yeah.
it can help with accountability, right, and visibility, right? So
Yeah.
it's a good thing, but that's a really good example of a tool that supports the characteristics of a high-performing team.
Well, what gets in the way? What gets in the way of building a resilient team?
Well, the first thing that just came to mind is egos.
Oh, gosh. Isn't that the truth? Egos they get in the way of everything, really. I mean, and it's interesting because ego is almost age independent to some degree, but I think as we get older, it tends to like really show up in all kinds of different ways. What is that young rascal doing? He doesn't know what he's doing. I've been doing this for 20 years. That kind of stuff.
But then when you get older than that, and actually the research supports this, like kind of retirement stuff, you become humbler. And you're no longer that know-it-all that loves to know how amazing you are by comparing yourself to others and putting others down.
Isn't that something? So ego. What other things get in the way of building a resilient team?
So, to be fair, like some of the unreasonable demands, either from the organization or from the market, customers, clients, and just too many people trying to do too much with too little. Something I think about, there's a lot of layoffs happening these days, particularly in healthcare. There's also a lot of
and tech also
retention problems, right? Right.
Yeah.
What happens is the people that are the high performers as individuals, they end up getting more and more in their plate, right? And they're good soldiers, so they try to deliver, and keep delivering, and then eventually, their own internal health, the mental health, the physical health, starts to take a toll, right? And they're just not, they're not performing at their best. So too high, unrealistic demands is another one.
One of the things that I've always discovered is if you bring in somebody who is not an A player, they're a B player, who in turn would hire a C player, that destroys a team. That absolutely destroys a team. And everybody is not saying it, but they're waiting for the management to get rid of the C player, because it's affecting morale, it's affecting productivity, and you start to actually lose the really good A players if you keep very low performing people on board for a long time. And by low performing, I would mean people who are just consistently missing deadlines, who are either getting confused, showing up to meetings unprepared. If you really want a high performing team, you have to hire those higher performing people. I know that when I was building my companies, I would pay 25% above market rates for my teams, because that ensured that they would stay with us for a long time. They would get offers by other people, but we were very, very competitive with salaries and, with like options and everything. But then we gave them a really fun environment. We gave them a lot of autonomy, and that kept the A players in tune. Interesting point though, Jeff, I'll share this. So one of my companies, we had an engineering team of about 7 people, and a few of my team members went to a conference and they were talking about all of these tools that we've been building. And the companies that we were talking to are like, so how big's your engineering team? Like 50 people? Nope, 7. That's how much an A player team, A plus player team, can outperform your average Joe.
Yeah, so let me say, so your 25% above market is what got him in the door. It's not what kept him in the door.
That's true. That's true.
It's the environment. Remember I talked about at the beginning, culture and productivity. So the productivity culture supports the productivity. So you are intentional around building a really good culture. I can tell you, a good friend and neighbor, she She actually had a partner buy her out, but she ran a digital marketing company, right? And she was just amazing at building culture, right? So everybody below her were basically millennials and Gen Z, right? And she's, for their annual retreat, gone to like Cuba or different places around the country. I mean, she knew that spending tens of thousands of dollars on experiences, that's the word, experiences, that these folks will remember and cherish, goes a long way when you think of the cost of replacing somebody. Sure, I just read some stats on that. Bottom line is not good. So she knew that. So one of the things to think about is, time, money, and energy spent on building culture, right? But also having a place to make sure that you have a feedback loop, people giving and receiving feedback and making it safe for people to share what's not working.
What would you suggest to a CEO to build a team? Let's say, say you're a new CEO. How would you build a team? What are the must-haves in building a team?
Well, if you're a new CEO and the organization's been there, you're basically walking into a team that already exists, right?
Right.
And there's a chance that the old CEO, there were problems at the team level, right, that the old CEO took a hit for. So you're walking into a situation, right? So the first thing you need to do is assess, right, quickly. So figure out, do your research, right, and talk to folks and listen to folks. So it begins there. And you do have to assess, don't come in swinging, right? And there's a good chance that the board says, I know a situation where the board basically said, when you come, I want you to get rid of this person. The last guy couldn't do it.
That happens all the time. Mm-hmm.
And, and you're in a job interview situation, right? And you want the job. So you're like, sure, right? It's unfortunate, right? Because there could be problems, even at that level. But so once you assess, then, you definitely, I highly suggest you do some sort of off-site, right, where you get to know each other as people and you get to know each other's communication style. And yes, you discuss the work, you talk, the vision, the priorities, right? But you create a set of rules, agreements around how to best communicate and collaborate. So I think the big takeaway here, Raj, is that it doesn't just happen, right? You have to be intentional. There's a lot of tools and resources available for folks if you want to do it, but you have to want to do it. I can tell you one of the biggest complaints you hear from a lot of CEOs is, I don't have time for that stuff, right? I don't want to spend that soft fuzzy whatever. And how much time are you willing to waste by not doing it?
So there's this, I think it was Jack Walsh who used to say that he spent 60 to 70% of his time on HR stuff. So like this, the touchy-feely things. And he would joke, he said, that's probably not enough, And I've talked to several other CEOs that have built, billion-dollar companies, and they say the same thing, that as they were starting to grow their companies when they were a little bit smaller, they would think, I just don't have time for all this, to get all this other work done. And they realized how critical all of that was to their growth, to their success, and they found that they're really spending half their time on HR type of things. It could be recruiting, it could be motivational things, it could be all kinds of different facets of a well-oiled machine. But that's pretty important. Let me ask you this question then: how would you deal with a team that's got a mix of people who've been there for a while? The CEOs comes in, they got to hire new people, so now you've got a mix of people who are like, oh, this is the way we've done things. There's new people coming in. Oh, we've got better ways. There could be a clash. There could also be generational things. Like maybe you've got a team where you've got some Gen Z, perhaps millennials, and then some older people who are maybe getting closer to retirement, or maybe, just have some conflicts there. So how do you deal with teams that are a mix?
Yeah, so something from our previous podcast that you gave reference to earlier is the importance of aligning on incentive structure, right? What are aligned goals and objectives, and our metrics? How are we going to all be measured towards that? So it starts there, right? Because it's not really a team if everybody has individual goals. You want a great way to destroy your team is give a mix of newbies and people that have been there for a while. Maybe throw in a new leader. Give everybody individual goals for which they will be given bonuses for if they achieve. Be non-intentional around how decisions are made. I mean, you start to feel. I'm getting feeling choked up. I mean, I'm getting right. And so it begins with having a clear vision and doing some inspirational leadership stuff, getting people really excited around this vision, and then show the whole map. Here's our priorities. Here's how we're going to be measured. Get them in a room together, doing different activities, right? It doesn't just build the team, but collectively focusing on goals. Reward good behavior, call out not good behavior.
Well, what's the number one complaint that you hear from CEOs or other team leaders about their teams?
Infighting. Here's some top ones. Infighting. There maybe agree in the meeting, but then it turns out they're having side conversations, right?
The side conversations kill you. Oh, yes.
Yeah.
They destroy a company. Yeah.
There was, I was working with a team last year, and one of that around this kind of stuff, one of the biggest issues there was that they weren't they weren't challenging each other, right? And so one of the problems that we often get, particularly in certain industries, is that people will, and somehow people have gotten the idea that holding someone accountable is somehow inherently aggressive. It shouldn't be. Here, you want a little trick to have a real conversation with somebody, a team member that resolves conflict. What your issue is, there's a judgment around it. Keep your judgment to yourself, but instead state an observation and either make a request or ask a question. So, for example, I noticed that you have canceled the last 3 meetings that we had around this project. By the way, that's making it difficult for me to deliver my results. What's getting in the way, and what can I do to make sure that that we continue our communication collaboration? In other words, it's raising the issue and having transparent conversations, but withholding judgment, because that's what gets us in trouble.
Your example leads into the question of trust, because you really need to be able to trust your other team members. It's a very important component of effective teams, effective collaboration. How do you know when that trust's there? What kinds of things erode the trust? And really importantly, when that trust is gone or starting to dissipate, how do you get it back?
So you probably know it's there when culture or productivity are hindered. When I just got off the phone with a leader who he said, we were going over his leadership development plan, and he said, my problem is I always believe that they an ace up their sleeve that they're not sharing with me, that they're basically not showing me all of their cards, and I end up agreeing to something that doesn't do well for my department for their own selfish interest. Okay. And I said, well, it's funny that you can share that, because your personality assessment shows that you are really high on mistrust, and your trusting as a strength is 0. And interestingly, when I did 8 interviews of your peers, the number one theme was that you think only of your department and not of everything else. So lo and behold, we reap what we sow, right? And he got it. And he said, I own it. You're right. Right. And I said, well, good. At least now that you know that you're bringing this on, let's talk about how you can think differently, speak differently, make decisions differently, right, and act differently so that you can build trust, right, among your colleagues. And by the way, stop doing what you're doing, right, over here, right? So that's a big one, right? So some people just poor early attachments in childhood, right? They bring it into the workplace, and they just inherently mistrusting. So they, don't share information. There's one thing that reduces trust, right? And they do all these other things to sabotage other people's results to benefit their own. Let me just state this real quick. My friends who are listening to this, in the long run, you will lose. You try to withhold information or hold back or do all this stuff. You will not fare well. You might get what you want in the short term, but it's not helpful in the long term. And it sure as heck isn't helpful for the good of the organization.
Yeah, that's the truth. That is the truth. I think sharing, open collaboration, that's actually how you get to that high-performing team. Otherwise, things just fall apart. Excellent topics, Jeff. Thank you for sharing your thoughts on how you build a high-performing team. I know I've been very fortunate to have high-performing teams, and boy, they really work wonders. I remember us being at one point, we were a 25-person company, 7-person engineering department, and people really thought we must have been a 100-person company. Thanks for sharing your thoughts. We'll catch you next time on the More Business Podcast.
Thanks, Raj. Good seeing you.